said no. He could have done so during the Allied meeting in Potsdam, the suburb of Berlin, where he would first meet both Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Truman privately compared Stalin to the boss of the Missouri political machine from which he had come, and nicknamed him Uncle Joe. Stalin privately called Truman that noisy little shopkeeper. The Allied leaders knew they had to deal with one another in the world after the war. Truman had postponed their meeting until he was pretty sure he had the bomb. In the New Mexico desert, the gadget, as the device to be tested was called, had been moved to ground zero. General Groves was pushing hard to test the plutonium bomb. If it worked, the United States could produce half a dozen or more, creating a nuclear arsenal, and giving President Truman enormous power in his dealings at Potsdam. At Potsdam, the president writes in his diary about his first meeting with Stalin.
We had lunch, talked socially, put on a real show drinking toast to everyone, then pictures made in the backyard. I can deal with Stalin. He is honest, but smart as hell. Most of the big points are settled. He'll be in the Jap war on August 15th. Finny Japs when that comes about.
At this moment in Potsdam, before the bomb is a reality, the president seems to understand that he does have an important alternative to an American invasion of Japan. The Red Army's entry into the war might be the way to end it. He rejoices about the Russians in a letter to his wife.
I've gotten what I came for. Stalin goes to war August 15th with no strings on it. I'll say that we'll end the war a year sooner now, and think of the kids who won't be killed. That is the important thing.
At the New Mexico test range on the night of July the 15th, the men of the Manhattan Project would not get much sleep. Thunderstorms threatened to postpone the test. One scientist bet on the chances that the blast would ignite the atmosphere. He offered a side wager on whether it would destroy the entire world or only New Mexico. And then, just before dawn, at 5:29 on the morning of the 16th, the world changed forever. New Mexico sent a coded cable to Potsdam. Operated on this morning. Results already exceed expectations. Dr. Groves, please. For President Truman at Potsdam, this was newfound power. James Burns called it the gun behind the door. There was now no longer a need for politically damaging concessions to the Japanese. And overnight, no more need for Stalin and his Red Army.
Stalin doesn't know it, but I have an ace in the hole and another one showing. So unless he has 3 or 2 pair, and I know he does not, we are sitting all right.
James Burns went to work immediately on the draft ultimatum to the Japanese. He took out warnings about the Russians and the bomb, and he erased the crucial language suggesting the possibility that Japan might keep its emperor.
One gets a sense from these actions, interventions by Burns, and the acquiescence in it by Truman, that they are of a mind, I agree, that as Burns put it at one point, as recorded in his aide's diary, that the point is to get the war over as soon as possible so that the Russians, the Soviet Union, don't get in so much on the kill of Japan.
President Truman's diary raises the question of just how much he understood at the time.
This weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. I have told the Secretary of War, Mr. Stimson, to use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target, and not women and children.
In fact, the target committee had made the decision to drop the bomb in the center of a city. Again, the president.
Even if the Japs are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we will issue a warning statement asking the Japs to surrender and save lives. I'm sure they will not do that, but we will have given them the chance.
In fact, there would be no explicit warning about the bomb to the Japanese, and the Potsdam Ultimatum would be issued the day after the military order to drop the bomb.
This is one time in which I think Truman really needed an option paper and needed to call in his advisors who were knowledgeable about what the situation was in a war, what the situation was in Japan, and what the options were, including the atomic bomb, and kind of say, okay, guys, you know, what should we do here? Here are the options. We can do this or we cannot do this, but let's talk about this and weigh the options and to look beyond and see what's going to happen or what we think might happen as a result of using different options.
Why did no one apparently sit down and say, why rush with this? We want to reconsider this. Do we want to think about this again?
I think I'd ask the question the other way around. That would have been the exceptional thing to do. I think the truth of the matter is that the notion that you have a very powerful new weapon which can shorten the war is controlling and compelling. Looking behind that, they would say, Colonel Stimson, if you were here now, would be grabbing my elbow and reminding me that he had a committee, that they had looked at the bomb, that the committee had recommended that it be used against workers' dwellings, against the city. The matter had been thought through, and the notion that you hit fast if you're going to hit was already settled. And Harry Truman, an artillery captain too, felt the same way.
I casually mentioned to Stalin that we had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. The Russian premier showed no special interest.
Actually, Joseph Stalin knew about the American bomb long before Harry Truman. He had spies at Los Alamos in New Mexico. But he did not know the bomb would be dropped on Japan, and he would be stunned when he heard the news. President Truman was now in a hurry to leave Potsdam, according to James Burns' press aide, so he wouldn't have to tell Stalin why he hadn't kept his ally informed about the bomb. Once on board the USS Augusta, Burns' aide would add this.
The president took Burns by the arm and said, "Come on, Jimmy, let's go below and have a drink. If these sons of bitches want to see me again, they will have to come to Washington."
The bomb would be dropped on Hiroshima 4 days later.
I think the moral ambiguities in the use of the bomb come down to the question of when we used it and when we needed it to save casualties. Why we used 2 bombs in August to prepare for an invasion in November, when they were the only 2 bombs we had. We assumed there'd be a 3rd one in 2 weeks, and a 4th one 2 weeks after that, but we weren't really sure. And the fact that we used those 2 in such a hurry, I think, speaks to Burns's concerns about the Russians rather than Truman's concerns about the casualties.
If proof were needed that the bomb had a momentum of its own, consider that even before the successful test of the plutonium bomb, the smaller uranium bomb, Little Boy, which scientists were certain would work without a test, had already left Los Alamos. Its voyage to Tinian Island, 1,500 miles from Japan, would take 10 days. The order to use the bomb was issued only as an afterthought, because the Air Force general in charge would not drop an atomic bomb without a written order.
The 509th will deliver its first special bomb as soon as weather will permit visual bombing after about August 3rd, 1945 on one of the targets. Additional bombs will be delivered on the above targets as soon as made ready by the project staff.
President Truman would later claim that he gave the order to drop the atomic bomb only after the Japanese rejected his Potsdam warning. The truth is that the order to drop the bomb was cabled from Potsdam the day before, and the president did not sign it.
There's no reason to believe Truman ever saw that order. He would later say in his memoirs that he consulted with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and then had the order drawn up. There's no record at all that he ever met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
So he may never even have seen the order.
There's no indication that it was shown to Truman. It was not, his approval was not asked.
The order is written by General Groves and signed by Colonel Stimson. In it, Groves gives himself full authority to use atomic bombs repeatedly as soon as they can be made ready. August the 4th. On Tinian Island, the crews chosen to fly the Enola Gay mission are brief. No one mentions the words atomic bomb. Bob Caron, the tail gunner, would remember it this way.
There were a lot of scientists with us. They had some movie film, but the projector broke down. But they had some slides. We knew it was going to be something big. We saw pictures of the test explosion at Trinity site in Alamogordo. It was just still pictures and slides, but it was breathtaking. The only way you could think of it was, what the hell is this?
It was a question of saving hundreds of thousands of American lives. At 2:45 a.m., the Enola Gay cleared the runway on special bombing missions with 10,000 pounds of atomic bomb called Little Boy aboard.
The mission pilot was Colonel Paul Tibbets.
We got off at about 3 o'clock in the morning. We felt that it was our lucky day. We knew it was as we made the final approach toward Hiroshima, which the navigator hit right on the button. I could clearly see the city of Hiroshima within my bomb sight.
August the 6th, 1945, 8:15 a.m.
There was an extraordinary flash, an eye-crushing flash. Then came the tremendous roar. I felt something strange on my face. Then I was shocked by the feeling that the skin on my face had come off, and the hands and the arms too. It was now dark like dusk. Everything was vague and hazy, as if a mist had covered my eyes. I wondered if I had lost my senses.
At that moment, a kind of panic began to well up from somewhere in the crowd, as first one voice, then another began passing along a message. It's gasoline. The Americans are dumping gasoline on us.
At least 75,000 people were killed instantly. The exact number of dead will never be clear, because whole families, whole neighborhoods were wiped out by the bomb. No one knows precisely how many died from the effects of radiation in the months and years to come. The bomb had been detonated directly above its target, the center of the city. Two days later, more than 1.5 million Red Army troops attacked the Japanese forces in China. Stalin rushed to get into the war before the new weapon could end it. The Japanese were no match for the Red Army. On Tinian, the plutonium bomb, Fat Man, was being made ready. The second atomic bombing had been scheduled for the 11th of August, but bad weather was forecast over Japan, and General Groves wanted to make sure that the plutonium bomb was field tested before the war was over. In Tokyo, the shock that Russia had entered the war forced military hardliners to begin talking surrender. They were still arguing on the morning of August the 9th. At 11:02 a.m., the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. There might have been a moment when the bombing of Nagasaki could have been stopped, or at least delayed, but no second order from the president was needed to drop the second bomb.
The first one had been dropped. The second one had been dropped. We knew we'd have another one in a couple of weeks. And before he heard the response of the Japanese about their surrender, he said, "Don't use that third bomb. I don't want to kill any more women and children." In that sense, Truman finally confronted the reality of the bomb.
On the 15th of August, the Emperor broadcast a message to the Japanese people. They had never before heard his voice. He tells them Japan will surrender.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification.
In the end, President Truman did accept a conditional surrender. He just called it unconditional. Emperor Hirohito would remain ceremonial head of the Japanese nation until his death 44 years later. Finally, the war was over. Americans had fought and won a truly heroic victory. The story most of us know ends there. A few months after the war, in a public opinion poll, almost 80% of the people endorsed dropping the bomb on Japanese cities. America had a nuclear monopoly. And even as new bombs were tested, debate over their use was limited. It would take a year after the war ended for the debate to sharpen. And then only when the entire issue of the New Yorker magazine was devoted to a report by John Hersey, entitled simply, Hiroshima. The article stunned Americans who'd known little about the bomb. It was broadcast nationwide on ABC radio.
We met hundreds and hundreds who were fleeing, and every one of them seemed to be hurt in some way. The eyebrows of some were burned off, and skin hung from their faces and hands. Some were vomiting as they walked. Many were naked or in shreds of clothing. Many, although injured themselves, supported relatives who were worse off. Almost all had their heads bowed, looked straight ahead, were silent, and showed no expression whatever.
Hersey's words drew pictures of the bomb's victims that Americans still could not see. Films and photographs had been confiscated by the U.S. occupation forces. Images like these were censored then, and they were among the first to be removed from the Smithsonian this year, when its planned anniversary exhibit came under attack. In 1946, facing a rising tide of questions and criticism, the atomic decision-makers would feel obliged to rewrite history. The president himself wrote to his ailing former Secretary of War.
There has been a great deal of conversation about how the conclusion was reached to drop the bomb, and there has been some indication that the decision was arrived at hurriedly and without consideration. I think you know the facts of the situation better than anybody, and I would like for you to straighten out the record on it.
And so Colonel Stimson was recruited to lend his name and reputation to an article putting forth the official view of why the bomb was dropped. The article claimed the atomic decision was, quote, carefully considered, and offered little hint that Colonel Stimson, at least, was haunted by the civilian deaths.
That article appeared in the February 1947 issue of Harper's Magazine. It was arguably the most significant magazine article to appear during the history of the Cold War, because it took what had been a growing debate over the decision to use the bomb on Japan and really cut it short.
The most enduring single fiction to grow out of the Harper's article was the notion most of us have long believed, that 1 million American lives were saved by the bomb. There is no documentary evidence as to where the number came from. But George Bundy, at 26, was the ghostwriter for the article that appeared in Colonel Stimson's name.
If you read it carefully, what it says is, if the war goes on to a point where we have to make the landings, I was informed that we could expect up to 1 million casualties, something like that, not deaths, casualties. So that's nothing but his picture of the worst that could happen if we can't get this war ended. It's not a claim that there would have been 1 million casualties.
In 1952, in a letter which became part of the official Air Force history of the war, President Truman revised his estimates of American casualties upward until they too matched the 1 million first cited in the Harper's article.
The casualty figures have always been a big part of the debate. So I think it's important to get the casualty figures right to begin with, but also to recognize that I think Truman would have used a bomb if it had been far fewer casualties than he later said it would have cost, but even far fewer than what his advisors were saying in the summer of 1945. I think if somebody said to Truman, Mr. President, you have a choice between dropping the bomb and saving, say, 1,000 American lives, and Truman said, do it, drop the bomb. I mean, I'm not sure at what number Truman would have said, well, wait, let's stop and think about this. But my guess is that it would have been a fairly small number.
The generation that fought World War II sees the war as having two bookends, Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima. The viciousness of Pearl Harbor is all but satisfied by the viciousness for Hiroshima. The ambiguity is something we're really not prepared for. We've all lived in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. We've all prepared through civil defense for some kind of a Holocaust that luckily never occurred. So we know how awful this thing can be. But I think we've never confronted the fact that we alone and without a clear justification militarily decided to use this thing as quickly as we could on inhabited cities.
The controversy about using the bomb is not going to be put to rest in this anniversary year. For one thing, it is hard for people who didn't live through the war to understand how much it meant to the men who believed their lives were spared because it was dropped. At the same time, it is clear there are people who don't want to contemplate the moral questions that are also part of the bomb's legacy. It's unfortunate, we think, that some veterans organizations and some politicians felt the need to bully our most important national museum, so the whole story of Hiroshima is not represented here. That is not fair to history or to the rest of us. After all, at the New Mexico test range on the night of July the 15th, the men of the Manhattan Project would not get much sleep. Thunderstorms threatened to postpone the test. One scientist bet on the chances that the blast would ignite the atmosphere. He offered a side wager on whether it would destroy the entire world or only New Mexico. And then, just before dawn, at 5:29 on the morning of the 16th, the world changed forever. Until he was pretty sure he had the bomb. In the New Mexico desert, the gadget, as the device to be tested was called, had been moved to ground zero. General Groves was pushing hard to test the plutonium bomb. If it worked, the United States could produce half a dozen or more, creating a nuclear arsenal, and giving President Truman enormous power in his dealings at Potsdam. To understand that he does have an important alternative to an American invasion of Japan. The Red Army's entry into the war might be the way to end it. He rejoices about the Russians in a letter to his wife.
I've gotten what I came for. Stalin goes to war August 15th with no strings on it. I'll say that we'll end the war a year sooner now, and think of the kids who won't be killed. That is the important thing.
Said no. He could have done so during the Allied meeting in Potsdam, a suburb of Berlin, where he would first meet both Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Truman privately compared Stalin to the boss of the Missouri political machine from which he had come, and nicknamed him Uncle Joe. Stalin privately called Truman that noisy little shopkeeper. The Allied leaders knew they had to deal with one another in the world after the war. Truman had postponed their meeting until at Potsdam, the president writes in his diary about his first meeting with Stalin.
We had lunch, talked socially, put on a real show drinking toast to everyone, then pictures made in the backyard. I can deal with Stalin. He is honest, but smart as hell. Most of the big points are settled. He'll be in the Jap War on August 15th. Finny Japs when that comes about.
At this moment in Potsdam, before the bomb is a reality, the president seems